Hi, everyone. This is episode 4 of Rambling AI. And yeah, we've been rambling.
Gotta love the rambling.
Just loving that ramble.
Easy way to make content.
I was asking someone, is rambling a British word? Is that like a British thing? And then someone was like, no, Americans are like, no, we use that.
I think we use it without the G on the end, though. Ramblin'. That would be
I should have just called it rambling with a little apostrophe.
we're in Florida. It's definitely more appropriate.
That's true. That's true. So today we have a topic, as we usually do, and we're going to talk about the cost of AI. The cost of AI, right? Because obviously everything has a cost, and there's obviously a big cost to AI. I mean, people are pouring trillions and trillions, investors are pouring trillions of dollars into this thing, right? And as consumers, we're just like, oh, great, cool. We have no idea how much it costs when we ask ChatGPT something, right? And not just money, but like the resources that are going into it. So I guess that's what we're going to talk about today. I've got a lot of things I can speak about in terms of like my experience this last few weeks with Claude bot, Open Claude, and just using Cursor and things like that. So I don't know, let's kick it off with kind of more of a broad look at the cost of AI. What do you know? Like, what have you learned about like OpenAI, Anthropic, and kind of funding and that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I think the cost is one of those questions that comes up a lot when people are thinking about, is AI worth it? Is the cost that we're investing in this from a economic standpoint, from a capital standpoint, really going to pay off? But it also translates down to the user experience. And you're finding people that are spinning up tools like, Claude bot, OpenClaw, and running up hundreds of dollars worth of bills without even really realizing it. Because the way that it's positioned to us as consumers of these tools is that you pay a certain amount of money and that gives you a certain amount of usage. But it's really hard to understand for any given thing that you're going to do how much that usage is actually going to cost. And so, it's a classic problem is when you start the process, you don't really know what it's ultimately going to take from tokens and time and latency and things. So the cost is just really difficult to understand ahead of time.
Mm. But like OpenAI, right? I mean, and Anthropic, right? They're not profitable, right? I don't know, but they're not profitable. They can't be.
Not from an operating standpoint. I mean, they're very much about investment. You look back at like the early days of Amazon, right? Famously, for a long time, Amazon didn't make any money, profit. And there was only a certain point at which they sort of just inevitably switched over. But in the early days, they would take every free dollar they had that you might have called profit and used it to invest in technology. So I think all of these companies are in the same boat. They want to build enough of a product out and have enough of a kind of operating margin that when they go to their investors and industry people, they can point to the model and say, look, the model works, it is profitable. We're just currently choosing to invest that in things that would make it look like it was unprofitable, but it's very much intentional to build out the tech.
Like supply and demand, right? There's definitely demand. Is there supply right now?
The supply constraint actually is more on the hardware than it is on, and hardware cost, hardware unavailability, function of cost. Like the more the hardware gets, obviously, then the more pressure there is on the pricing side of it. But constraint right now seems to be who can get their hands on the chips. And as the models get more and more advanced, there's just a progressively more and more chips needed, and so it becomes a diminishing return over time of acquiring all this new hardware, but then not, the model's not sort of making commensurate advances compared to the additional costs associated there.
Yeah, I always think about like everyone's talking about like agents taking over the world, right? Oh my gosh, I can't believe an agent just did this. What was it that happened? You pointed out something yesterday. An agent, the story about the agent, like
Well, he wrote a hit piece on
hit
someone,
piece.
and as a way of sort of, you give it a goal, it's somewhere along the line realize that, if you're trying to make a pull request commit to a project and you get denied, somewhere along the line it figured out that all you have to do is write like a really scathing, public post about the person and sort of pressure them into approving your commit. And like, where it learned that from, who knows? But like, it definitely decided that was the right case to go. But I think the most interesting thing about that was like the follow up, where the bot saw that he had described this scenario and was like, "Oh, okay, I'm sorry,
Yeah, it's most
I'll go
interesting the
back."
social angle to that,
Yeah,
because it was more about like the dynamic socially between him and his ego getting hit, and the agent, which obviously doesn't have an ego, doesn't have a soul,
yeah,
but it
yeah.
created its own persona and played along nicely.
Well, you think of the way it lies into the cost there, right? Like, someone was paying the tokens for it to sort of behave this way, and at scale, if the cost to the individual who's sort of on the receiving end of that is higher, however you want to quantify it, to the cost of running those tokens, then this is kind of inevitable.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to get to really, was that people see this stuff in the news. I have this thing like called hype versus AI, or the hype you see on the news, you see on these the threads and Reddit and stuff, and then the reality, right? And a lot of the time we're just stuck in this hype because the news and media, everyone loves hyping up these things, but the reality is often different. And another thing that I was thinking about like a couple of weeks ago when that social network for agents came out, where they're all just like posting stuff and then they're commenting on it. And the media is like, oh my God, look, they've created this forum for agents to talk to one another. But my experience is I looked at that and I'm like, yeah, there's quite a controversial topic or whatever, or something that's written, an agent has written. Maybe they used the latest model or something because it looks really well written. And then you look at all the responses, the comments, and it looks just like, oh, you're absolutely right. And good catch. And
You're absolutely
you're
right.
absolutely right, and it's just all these sort of very cliche responses that obviously maybe were use haiku or GPT Mini or something like that, and agents are just like rattling and bouncing off each other, saying random boring stuff, right? So someone has spent a lot of money doing that original post, probably using a very good model. All the responses are probably using a cheap model. So everyone that talks about, oh my gosh, agents are going to take over the world, well, that requires these agents to be on the best, most latest models, and as you probably know, it's expensive.
Very expensive.
So my experience of using Claude bot, now called Open Claude, Open Claude. I never know what it's called today.
Could probably
It
change.
changes every day. My experience of using it was that like I was running up big bills because I was just topping up I put $50 into the Claude account. I was like, cool, this should be enough. Let's run it. And I'm like using it. It's running. It's doing job searching. I created a job board with it. It's doing research on companies. It's letting me know. It goes on WhatsApp. It's like, oh, I finished that. So I'm like, oh, great. Can you look for this? Whatever. I'm having this conversation. And before I know it, and then it's like error, could not connect to a gateway or whatever. I'm like, oh. And then it didn't respond. It just wouldn't respond. I went back to my computer because I was using WhatsApp, and then went back to my computer, and I was like, what's happening here? And I put the error message into a different Claude, whatever, on a different account, and it said, oh, you've run out of tokens. I was like, what? No way. I put $50 into this. I look on the console, and of course, I was actually in deficit. I was like negative something.
They caught you. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I was like, "Are you serious? That will cost me like $50 in like maybe 6 hours of messing around with it, right?" So I was like, "Okay, well, I'll throw another $50 at it."
Yeah.
And then, of course, what happened was it was doing this heartbeat thing. So every time it ran this heartbeat, it was doing something and burning up fucking tokens. And yes, I had like Opus or something selected, right? Didn't need Opus, but it's a great model, right? So as soon as I switched to Haiku, it was a lot cheaper, but it didn't quite do as good a job. So yeah, so my point is, everyone talking about agents and stuff. I know from my personal experience, it was expensive. 50, let's say $100, right, for this experiment that lasted a few days. Anyone that's doing this agent stuff must have deep pockets, unless I'm doing it completely wrong. And if I am, please post in the comments because maybe I am.
Yeah. No, I don't think you're doing it wrong. I mean, I think this is kind of by design. I mean, even if you think about like the idea of the agent versus the idea of like the original ChatGPT, you ask a question, it gave an answer. Boom. Right. Agent continues going, right, in a loop for some period of time. So if you look at everything that agent's doing in that and you say, quantify all of those tasks, how many of those tasks truly need the cutting edge agent, right? Some of them do. The content creation one, the one that decides what the data, the information in the post should be, like what the language should be, right? That you probably need the latest and greatest. But the part of it where it actually makes the post, no, you don't need 4.6. But the agentic approach doesn't leave room for that. You pick a model, you execute the task, and then the whole thing goes end to end. So you can almost see like an emphasis on that form of engagement happening. And I think it's due because they know that that's where their money's gonna come from. Like, it doesn't benefit OpenAI to build a harness that switches back and forth between, the latest ChatGPT and fluoro emitting in situ, right? It doesn't benefit them to do that. They just want you to pick the best one and then run it.
Yeah, and
So,
I think a lot of people think about they forget about that actually these are businesses. Like I mean, OpenAI isn't that like a non-profit? A
you
non-profit.
started that way, and they like to talk
Okay, all
about
right.
it.
But then Anthropic is, they're for-profit companies. They're about to make, they're trying to make a profit.
Yeah,
So,
sure,
and I
right.
think we forget that. So there's a lot of money being made by them, but then, like we touched on earlier, it's probably still not profitable, which makes you wonder, like, what does the model look like to be profitable?
I if you are in that decision-making process about how to decide what model is gonna be there, you have to it sounds a little dramatic to call it an adversarial relationship between us trying to use these models and the companies that are provide them, but then in a different way, it kinda is an adversarial relationship because our interest in engaging with these products is, especially at an enterprise level, is we're trying to reduce costs, right? We're trying to automate things. We're trying to bring those costs down. But the other side of that, they're trying to raise our costs. They want more money. So the more we spend, the more revenue it is. So if they're, OpenAI, Gemini, if they're designing a product and they're trying to make a trade-off between the quality going to be a little better or the cost going to be a little higher, they're always going to go for the cost being higher, more tokens. What was thinking, right? Thinking was quality at the expense of cost because it's using up a lot more tokens doing all that thinking. But if you're not really thinking about it like that, then you don't really see.
Mm. Well, for me, when I've been doing some work for a client this week, and there was a bug that came up that was really difficult to diagnose. And if I just use auto mode in Cursor or a cheaper model, I don't think it would have got it. And I know that because a similar bug happened, like let's say 6 months ago, when those models were like the best models, 3.5 or whatever. Um, and I knew that I had to use Opus 4.6 to fix this bug because I knew it would do that thinking thing. And I, put the screenshots in, I put the bug report in, I put some description, I put all that information into the context, hit the button, go, and then you can see it going thinking, 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 thinking. And it's looking at, and I'm reading it. It's like, oh, I need to check this. I need to check that. Oh, that's interesting because of this, this. I said, maybe I need to go into the database and pull out that user, and it does all this stuff. Great. As you would expect it to do to fix the bug, did a lot of research into the and yeah, lo and behold, it fixed the bug. But I looked at my usage because I'm right now, I've gone over my $200 a month on Cursor. I'm paying by usage base now. And I'm like, I get scared every time I refresh the usage page. Hurts a little bit. But for that particular request, I actually looked at it, and you can see each request. And I was refreshing as it was running. And yeah, I think it cost me $1, maybe $1.20, which doesn't seem like a lot. But that was one bug, and I did it carefully, so it did one had a one pass at it rather than just like a whole conversation where you keep passing the context in every single message you send.
Yeah. Well, I think about it from a user experience standpoint, right? A product design. Why doesn't Cursor tell you how much what you're doing costs in the tool? It can,
It tells you if you're over your limit.
but it won't tell you how much you just spent. The only way to do that is to pull up their little usage page and then refresh it as you go along,
That's what I do.
right? So, but Cursor knows how much the models cost. They for sure know, and they know how much tokens are being used, and they fully control the product. So they can definitely put the costs into the product without making you go to the website and log in. Yet they choose not to. There's a product reason for that. That's a trade-off of user experience, of understanding how much you're spending for their benefit. But if you don't know how much you're spending, you're likely to overspend.
Another interesting thought that just came up. There's a dopamine hit for me when when I have it. Well, obviously when you fix the bug, but when you do the prompt, and you click go, and you're watching it do this thing really fast, and it's coming up with responses. And obviously, you're absolutely right. Like there's a dopamine hit. I mean, they used to do. What happened to the emojis? I feel like there's no emojis now.
No,
And
I think it's like cliched out, basically. EM dashes have gotten a
the
little
rockets. It's like, oh my god, we fixed the bug. Rocket, rocket, rocket. And actually, yeah, like 3 months ago, it was like you have not fixed the bug. So go away with your stupid rocket emojis. Get back to work. Yeah, I find like there's a bit of a dopamine hit for me when it does that, and I want to keep talking to it, and every time you respond, it keeps sending the same context, which makes it more expensive. The smart developer or product builder is going to go, I'm going to start a new chat window. But that means they've got to do more work. They've got to make sure there's a markdown file. There's a, there's the repository is set up a certain way. Maybe they've pushed to Git and there's a recent commitment. You have to do it smart, right? If you're going to do that approach and make sure that the context you're passing is the minimal amount of context required so that the agent knows what it has to do, but it's saving you money. Lazy way, which is me, the lazy one is just keep chatting and obviously keeps the context and knows what you're trying to do. But then, yeah, you can just see I mean, sometimes I see it in the dollars, my requests because I haven't started a new conversation, and that's on me.
But anything that you feel like you need to do in order to be a responsible user of a tool, you can't purely own the fact that you don't have visibility to that. This just all feels very intentional to try to get people in the mode of just turn everything that you can over to the most expensive version of the model and like don't ask any questions, right? Like the best cursor can do is use the expensive one to do the plan and then switch to auto to execute it. But you have to do that. You have to go in and click and then type and then click. And it's not designed to facilitate that. It would be an extremely simple product change that when you switched into plan mode, it switched into open. And when you switched out of plan mode, it switched back to auto.
You forget.
From a user experience standpoint, right? That would make a huge amount of sense. Tiny, tiny, tiny change to the software, and yet don't do it. So,
Or it could even have before it even hits the LLM, the cursor could have some sort of basic native in the software detection to see if your prompt is a bug fix or something simple, a one-liner, or a really complex thing. I mean, it could probably do that with regular expressions, probably, right? And then it would say, "Oh, I'm going to flip to Haiku or something because this is a very simple bug fix." Or, for example, if you do this, which you're supposed to not do, but like use Git commands in agents, simple, right? Or can you find a file for me or something? Can you add this to my Git repository? Is this file name? That could just be a simple model. But if you have Opus 4.6 still selected, it's going to cost.
it's going to cost, and you're going to forget.
So-
It's the text that tells you what model you're using is a medium gray on black.
So the point we're making here is that these companies it's a company. They're trying to, they know how we're going to use the product, and they're making money from us.
Yeah.
And the dopamine thing adds to that. I mean, I was just thinking, why don't they add like the slot machines in the casinos, like ding, 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 ding. They should do that every time you like get a bug fix or something, or when it does the little summary, and then you just keep on pulling the lever.
Yeah, I just keep on going. I mean, it's just easier to ask another question than to think critically about the way it's going out. But even if you look at like from an experience standpoint and just think about how they've structured pricing, everybody kind of coalesced behind the original pricing model for ChatGPT, which was $20 for unlimited usage, right? That was the original one. And everybody then globbed onto that.
It's a bit like
Cursor, Gemini, and
it's a bit like again showing my age here, but a bit like Basecamp back in the day,
yeah,
2000 and I don't know, 10, whatever it was. Everyone was 29 a month. Do you remember that? Like everything was like, or was it 24 a month? I think it was 24 a month or something. And everyone was like, oh, it's got to be $24 a month.
yes, the not quite round number.
And then I think was it OpenAI or now it's just it's $20. No one's like trying to hide it. It was $19 a month. It's $20 a month or $60 a month. And that seems to be the new way. Anyway,
No. I mean that there's a certain groupthink around the way costs work and the way prices work. The groupthink around the way costs work is don't really make it super clear how much this stuff is costing. Encourage people that anytime they run into some sort of a gap in the harnesses capabilities, in your prompting skills, in the data that's available, any gap you run into, the answer is always use a better model, spend more money, right? So it's aligned behind that as the way to go. And on the pricing side, pretty much standard now is $20 a month gets you unlimited usage, but then ends up being capped in a way where you probably can't use it all the time.
I was using Claude Cowork last night. I was up way too late messing around with this thing. It's actually pretty cool. I was having fun with it. anyway, it does have a limited. I think I'm paying $20 a month for the pro plan or whatever. And I was thinking, well, what if, I know it's expensive to use Open Claude because I was directly hitting the LLM and the usage. But with Claude Cowork, it's the $20 a month and it's unlimited, right? But I was like, how is this? This surely is going to cost me. There must be some overage, whatever. I went into the settings. There is, but you actually can use it unlimited. It's just you get a cutoff. Like you can only use it. There's a usage bar, and every 4 hours it resets, or something like that.
Yeah.
I thought that was kind of a cool way to do it. But I noticed again when I was using Opus, it was like going all the way to like 80% really quickly.
Yeah. The dynamic that changes when you start with a certain approach to it, and then that approach changes over time, right? So we started with it's $20 a month unlimited, right? And that was the ChatGPT web interface, which was understandably kind of localized. Then when the coding tools came, they copied the same $20 a month. But then it turned out that like coding is a lot more expensive than than doing that kind of web one. So then the usage cap, right? To try to control it. Okay, well, what happens when you see the usage cap? Okay, well, we need another tier. So they all said, well, the next tier is, I think Cursor went 60 and then 100 and then 200 and Claude went 100 and 200. And there was this, and but so the dollar amount, the anchoring points are different, but you'll notice the same pattern. Pay more money, a certain amount of more money on a percentage basis, get an escalating amount of usage. It was, you go from 20 to 100 with Claude, you're paying 5x more, but you're getting 10x more usage, right? So that encourages you to spend as much as you can because it pushes you up the value chain, right? The dollars per token. It decreases as you go up. And so that encourages you to spend more. So there seems to be this acceptance amongst all these tools that the goal is take whatever it is that people are doing and then try to figure out how to get them to spend as many tokens.
It's like everyone's trying to shoehorn this model into a SaaS model of like a $20, $40. It doesn't work though. Like it really is all about the usage,
It doesn't work. And that's why you'll see even with Cursor, and they don't even really do this as much anymore, but that idea that there was a subscription you were paying, you could still go into the interface and see the actual cost you were spending. And I remember seeing screenshots of people, I'm on the $60 a month plan, but they were spending $1,000 in sort of Cursor's accounting for that. And you can only do that for a period of time before Cursor looks at that and goes, well, look, we just can't do this, right? Because their costs are definitely scaling with what you see. They're willing to eat it in the early days because give them $20, give them $500 of value. That gives us momentum. Cursor doesn't need momentum at this point, right? And they'll all go through this where now it's time to start harvesting.
I feel like that. It
Yeah.
does feel like that more now. The costs for us as the consumer are going up. And I feel that a lot of that's probably just pressure from investors to say, hey, we need to make some money, or at least we need to stop losing money. So the
Can't
powers,
subsidize it forever.
yeah, they're
Right?
saying, well, okay, fine, let's ditch the way the monthly model, and let's just start charging with usage. And they're probably now starting to see some benefits as people are paying, like me, are paying for their usage.
Well, I think probably what you saw was the need to generate cash flow internally rather than purely relying on investor demand for that. The investor demand has definitely like started to tail off as sort of the idea of it being a bubble and whether it's a bubble or not, and is it going to burst? Like that just kind of depresses the investment demand. And if you need a bunch of cash in order to keep moving forward, because all these guys are kind of locked in an arms race by who can deploy the most cash, and your investor side starts to dry up a little bit or at least get a little bit harder, you're going to try to start harvesting more from your customer base to keep that cash flow up. So that thought process behind there, part of it is, tap into the usage and figure out how to direct that. But another one is encouraging people to use these frameworks that end up costing a lot of money. I mean, in there was an open source version of what the sort of VS Code UI is, Open Code, I think. And you could plug in your Anthropic API key and use the API on it. And Anthropic went and said, no, we're not going to allow that because they want to control the experience of using the model. And the only real reason that you want to do that is you want to control the product decisions that are made off of it to keep it aligned with your interests as an organization. If you just fully back off and let everybody use it, they're going to prioritize it based on their concern, which is keeping the cost down. So you have those two things in conflict, and then you see that playing out across the landscape with different companies taking different tacks on it. The Anthropic, you know, definitely leaning into it more versus Google because Google has another source of cash flow. They have their ads, but Anthropic doesn't. Cursor doesn't. So they're forced to sort of move into a different way of approaching that problem because of the position.
Let's go back to software as a service. This is another topic we'll probably touch on as like I was saying, the death of software as a service. So that's definitely another topic. But back on this whole like shoehorning into the SaaS model thing, like I know there's a lot of startup founders who are bringing out products, myself included. I've been trying to work on my own product that is a SaaS. It's a monthly subscription, but it uses AI, right? And honestly, I was kind of freaking out because I was like trying to run the costs. And I'm one of the power users of my own product, and I was looking if I use it daily, what does it cost? And I have like all very detailed logging in there that looks at the kind of the cost of the tokens and how much I'm using and what the cost per month is for someone like me. And I think it works out to be like I don't know I'm gonna say bucks. The power user is like $4 or $5 a month. Not very much. A lot of it's just text based stuff. What my app does. But it was something I have to look at because I'm like, well, hang on. If it costs like, 15, $20 a month to support someone who's a power user and they're paying $20 a month, it's not a good model, right? SaaS traditionally, for me, in my experience with building SaaS companies, very, 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 very profitable. We're talking 90 something percent profit margins, excluding like people, but the actual cost to run the service is extremely profitable. And my worry with all of this is that people like myself or young people coming in and saying, "Oh, I'm going to create a new SaaS company," and obviously it's going to use AI, not taking into consideration the actual cost of AI and the LLMs, and that they might know even now they might be like me, and they're tracking and saying, "Oh, it costs $3 or $4 a month," but that's based on the costs that we're experiencing. That's what we're being charged right now, right, by these platforms. Who's to say they're not just going to rip them up at some point because they're like, okay, we're done with our experiment now. We now know we're now going to actually give you the real cost of this, the GPUs and all the cost of, and then there's going to put a load of SaaS business maybe out of business, but they're certainly going to have to rethink their whole pricing model. What do you
Yeah.
think about that?
The the news right now in particular is very negative toward the idea that those SaaS business models that were built previously, which do look like what you're talking about, the very profitable, very scalable sort of, everything's aligned with that. That idea that business like that exists at that profitability level was always tenuous. I mean, this applies in so many ways, but anytime there's a true market in competition, any sufficiently marginally profitable angle will eventually be competed down to the marginal cost of everything else. So you find a really, really good distribution channel, you lock into one, first guys that were doing advertising on YouTube, right? It'll be profitable, then it'll not be profitable because everybody will pile in, the costs will rise. So there's like an inevitability to it. And the SaaS business model being so economically useful lasted a long time. But that's over now because, you know, any tool that can be built with these agents and that you're not bringing true industry guidance to it, like industry guidance that wouldn't be in the models, right? Truly new things. That any of those businesses, there will suddenly be 100 clones of them. And each one of those clones then becomes the only differentiator becomes things like pricing, things like distribution, things like reputation driving it. And that'll compress the margins because those things cost money and that's going to eat away at your margin in order to maintain that same thing. So I don't think it's necessarily the death of SaaS. I think it's the death of SaaS as a guaranteed way to a really scalable, cheap way at high margins of funding growth. Now it's going to be a little closer to what the traditional software business would have been of download it to your machine, and work with it. Those margins went through their own compression as you went from the sort of the evolution of that software through the PC, the Mac era, and sort of being a lot of desktop stuff. So it's not that we're going to regress to that as much as the margins from SaaS businesses will start to regress to that.
Yeah, I mean, it's all going to have to be rethought. And in terms of the whole death to SaaS thing, I think a lot of it is coming from this idea that most apps that are coming out right now are wrappers of models like OpenAI or Claude, or they're basically doing the things that ChatGPT could do, and people are launching whole business of them. I think I saw a meme actually this week, and it was something like uh, my face when Anthropic releases a free feature, which my whole SaaS business is based around, and he's just like trying, just like dying, and so it's kind of like that. That's, I think, maybe the issue, really, what people are talking about, not necessarily death of the model itself, but just the fact that a lot of these apps are just getting wiped out daily because they go, oh, I'm going to create an app that does this, and then Anthropic go, oh, we can do that too. Yeah. I mean, I've experienced that a little bit with my product, but I still want to think it's different and it offers more than, it's not just a wrapper. But then I think a lot of people would argue the same thing. Yeah. But that's definitely a valid concern with anyone that's launching not only the pricing and the cost, but also just what are you actually solving, and is it something that a free version of a feature that Anthropic release can just solve?
Yeah, I feel like what's happening right at this moment is very much fear-based with a lot of how the traditional markets are reacting to what seems to be happening within the AI influence part of the market. You saw Claude launch, Claude for Legal,
Yeah.
I think last week, towards the end of last week, and, a number of legal SaaS related, stocks fell, Thomson Reuters, LegalZoom.
What was it you said we should short or go long on?
Well, so the space, right? We look at legal SaaS. So just use those two examples because those are two really examples. You got Thomson Reuters, which runs a whole bunch of news organization. They have a lot of proprietary data. Like that that business as a whole did not suddenly lose 20% of its enterprise value because Claude announced that they were going to have Claude for Legal,
It's
right?
emotionally driven.
Yeah, it's emotionally, it's fear driven, right? They could take it over. Now we've seen Claude launch a number of things that have been impressive, but haven't destroyed industries. But you look at those two examples, Thomson Reuters, then you look at LegalZoom. What is LegalZoom? Their whole model was make it really easy to do simple legal forms. Where will Claude Legal probably be really good? Simple legal forms, right?
Mm.
So a LegalZoom is probably affected by, but they can also develop that technology themselves. So it's not guaranteed that truly, if it was a competitive threat, they wouldn't be able to respond to that. But you look at those two companies side by side and you say Thomson Reuters with a huge amount of intellectual property that these models are going to need in order to work, and then LegalZoom, which is more of an automation or a cost reduction on a standardized activity, and you say Claude Legal affected both of those equally. No, right? Yeah, LegalZoom, however much growth was factored into their multiple, fair, but not the same as the Thomson Reuters. But the nuance there hasn't caught up with the market that's making those kind of moves.
I will say that I did try and create, I think it's a W-4 or something. At the end of tax year, you get
Yeah.
all these emails like, hey, can you send me your W-4, which is basically a form, an IRS form that has your company name or your EIN number and just your address and stuff like that. It's really simple. Just you give that to them and they file it, right? Um, People were asking me for it, so I was just like, oh, maybe I'll just have ChatGPT generate it or something. I'm sure, or Claude or whatever. I think I asked a couple of models, and I said, this is my company name, this is my address. Can you create the W4? You'd think simple, very simple. It didn't do it. It couldn't do it. It created like a printable PDF. It just looked really terrible. And I was like, there's no way the IRS are going to accept that. But yeah, maybe the legal feature that you just talked about would be able to do that.
Yeah. A lot of those forms are just they're spots you're supposed to put information, and you can fill it out a number of ways based on what your situation is. And those kind of forms are what LegalZoom was founded on.
Uh, Another one is, again, I don't want to just come up with like start, which is be ruined, but like filing, creating LLCs. I mean, you can do that agentically. It might be a little trick. There's not AI, APIs that you can hit to create an LLC, but there's definitely easy ways to do it on a form through Sunbiz in Florida and things like that. Agentically, you could do that with Claude Cowork. Open up sunbiz.com. Here's my details. Set up an LLC, and here's my credit card. I mean, I don't know if you would do that, but it would be easy for an agent to set up an LLC. And there's companies that charge $500 to do that, $300, $400 to set up an LLC. For people that just are like, I can't do that. But
Yeah.
if you had an agent that said, all we need to know is your company name you want and the address, who's going to be your main principal, whatever, the agent could do that. And that would cost a few bucks, maybe less than.
Well, the agent can do it, but then also it would be really easy to build a LegalZoom right now.
Yeah, the whole
Anything that has a standardized set of forms, right? And then you're like, look, these are the forms. IRS publishes the forms. LegalZoom doesn't pick the forms, right? Publishes the forms. You need to know how to fill it out, but there's lots of ways that you can gather that information, and models probably understand pretty well how to fill out a 10K or that's an SC document, but a 1040, something like that. It's in there. So if I was going to come out right now and have it vibe me out a SaaS LegalZoom, I could do it easily, right? Now, would it be successful? I don't have the distribution that LegalZoom does, but is the idea that I can do that threatening enough to LegalZoom that it reduces their enterprise value? It seems like it.
It's a similar sort of thing. Like 6 months ago, all the dev shops were freaking out because AI can build projects in like 2 weeks as opposed to 2 years or whatever. So they're freaking out now. Do we have to rethink our pricing model? And at that time, a lot of lawyers and everyone else was just like, we're untouchable. We're going to be fine. And now I think, yeah, they're getting a little worried because this is coming out. But it's the same kind of thing. It's like, well, what's the cost again? I think that maybe you're going to get harder because I don't know. What do you think about that? Like in terms of the cost, we were talking about cost of AI in this area.
AI, in terms of how it affects, a couple episodes back, we're talking about jobs as sort of they reflect. And with lawyers and with anyone who's sort of the expert experiencing these tools, the reflexive version is, it's not going to be able to do what I do. You know, I'm protected. I'm going to be safe. And some of those people that are saying that are absolutely true, right? But it has like a hollowing out effect. Is the middle ground of not the very, very entry level person and not the very, very good person, but the level just above that, right? Where the models are probably good enough to do that. Yes, the lawyer's right. It's not going to sit in court and argue a case, right? But is it going to remove so much of the sort of bread and butter kind of business that they could do? And all that will be left is sitting in trial and making arguments. And do they need to do that? Yes. But then does their business as a firm, does the revenue of the firm still look the same if some of these lower level tasks are being there? And it can't. That's the sort of the economic function that it has. Thinking that because you are an entity that does a particular business now, and an automation comes along that's going to make that easier and cheaper, automatically assuming that then you are going to be the one to capture the margin for that is short-sighted. You have to do that very intentionally. There's a reason why law firms don't offer LegalZoom type stuff, right? Because that wouldn't be considered sort of viable business. You remember we had one here that was doing a walk-in shop for legal work like that. There's one here in Jackson that a guy that we all knew was like building, it was like a franchise. And there was a lot of back and forth about the relationship between firms that help you fill out legal documents and the lawyers that would ultimately be doing that if you didn't have a service like that. And in one sense, it's lead generation, right? You start with the easy, cheap document, and and then as it gets more complicated, or then you kind of escalate to the lawyer. So you might see that pattern come out where the AI tools are sort of giving you a step in the water, and then when it gets difficult, uh, then that's when the professional would step in. Every time you do that, as long as it's doing something, then it's taken that work away from what would have gone professional. And the company we were talking about that was doing the legal docs, they ended up falling, behind and ultimately ended up closing down because that was seen as such a threat of hollowing out of the low end from a retail standpoint that AI just kind of leapfrogs the whole thing, but it brings the same basic economic effect back to the fore in terms of how.
Yeah, we kind of went off on a tangent there. We're talking about the legal side, but that is a whole topic in itself. And it would actually be good to get someone in on the show that is in that space and ask them, like, are you worried? Where, if you're not worried and you're actually embracing it, where do you think there are opportunities? And I do imagine it's very much like in the coding development world. We could save a lot of money because it's automation, a lot of it, right? We can save a lot of money and bring more profitability by just using AI or agents to do a lot of this work that you just said. I can see that being another industry to be
Yeah.
disrupted. Well, obviously Claude know that. Anthropic know that.
Well, part of the Claude version of coming out with a product like that is a little bit of migration you're seeing towards closer maps to use cases than what they had done previously. Coding was, is a use case, and that was kind of the first shift. It was like, ask it, ChatGPT, ask it anything. Okay, but I want to ask you a coding question. So now you need to refine a little bit to get to coding questions. That was kind of the first thing to focus on, but that's too broad still. So now you Claude for legal, Claude for Excel, Claude for, for blank is reaching out and trying to find those more specific use cases that perform that basic kind of nichification function that you get when you have the one big thing that's very general, and then you start creating verticalized versions of that to do something very specific. Usually, that would be a market doing that. Like Claude would come out and they would say, "Okay, we have the API that we want to drive everything," and then 1,000 startups would come, all verticalizing that model, and that would be a healthy ecosystem with a lot of iteration in it. But because these companies have gotten so much money, and because they need to spend that money, right? And there is clearly diminishing returns in spending that money purely in increasing the capabilities of the models, they start investing that by building product to try to drive revenue up. And those products inevitably mean verticalization. So they are they are the biggest sort of gorilla stumbling around inside the market they created and just stomping on people without even really realizing it, other than it seems like a good idea to do that. And it'll be interesting to see whether the other players follow this, because you don't see OpenAI for specific use cases like that yet. You don't see Gemini. You don't see Grok, right? Anthropic's really the one that's taken that lead. Um, and if that ends up being, the big winner, then you'll just see them all doing that, just like they all took the same path of pricing and all the same path of cost. Personally, as someone who's very interested in sort of doing things with this and building things, I would prefer them to just do the models. Just build the better and better models. Let the people that are closest to the users, that understand the user's experience, that can build things specifically for that, let them build the use cases. Don't build sort of your generic version of nobody, in Anthropic is using this to do lawyery things. Right? They think this is a product that they can sell to lawyers, but it would be better if you let startup founded by lawyers who know what, let them create a product like that. That product will be superior, but because Anthropic has so much distribution power in the market, it's squashing all of those. Even though they're better products, they get squashed because you simply can't compete with the 800-pound gorilla.
Yeah. Yeah, we touched on a few things today. I think my takeaway from all of this would be like, if you're thinking about cost and how much money you're spending or not spending on, I mean, I would say you have to spend something to be in the AI world. You have to have a budget. Like I have some people come to me and they say, "Oh, how do you do that? What you're doing there?" Or I'm trying to get this image generation to do something, whatever it is, right? And I'm like, I just assume they're paying for a subscription. I'm like, well, you just use this or do this. And they're like, oh, I can't on the free plan. I'm like, free plan? For one, I forgot there was a free plan. Yeah, no, you can't do a free plan. Like you have to pay for this thing. And once you start paying, for me, it just keeps going up and up and up. And I'm spending more and more money because it's my business, it's my profession. But for someone that's maybe not, and they're just tinkering, I would say be careful because it is kind of addictive. It is fun. Like, it is fun building your own products. You could spend, like, $50 building a really cool product, and then you just throw it away at the end of the day. Like, I spent a lot of money on tokens building this game for my kids. It was addictive. It was so much fun. I probably spent, like, 100 or $200 building this game. But, I mean, it's worth it for the kids, right? But if you aren't aware of what you're doing and you don't, like, I mean, I wrote it all off as business, right? But if you don't actually have a real plan, you gotta be careful because you can spend a lot of money in these AI products, and it's probably only gonna get more and more as they kinda ditch this whole monthly SaaS model thing, and they just do usage based, which, by the way, I think is gonna be the reason why it's happened, I think, is because of agents. I think because when agents came out, they were like, well, we have to do this usage-based thing now because agents going backwards and forwards, it's not just a prompt thing and a response. It's like, we don't know how long these, how much these agents are going to cost in terms of, we can't like easily figure that out. So yeah, my takeaway would just be careful. Have caps, have limits on when you set up the billing account. And I want to spend no more than $50 on overages. I want to, just cap your use. Go into the usage thing, refresh that as often as you can. If you're building your own product, build a table in the database that tracks all the requests, what model it was, how many tokens. Just track everything. Just get as much data as you can, because you need to know what this thing costs. What would you say to that?
Yeah, it's been a lot of what I've been kind of working on personally, and I have a framework that I put together for some of my personal projects, and I'm kind of thinking about pushing out there because I ran into the same thing. And I think anybody that's thinking about whether agents are a solution to a problem, you have to really think, you know, there is a way that these companies are positioning themselves to get you to use agents the way they want. They want you to pick one model, they want you to give it a basically infinite task, and then they want you to let it run all the way to completion. But there is almost no real world scenarios where that's true. Real world scenarios are task based. Do this thing, do this thing, do this thing. And almost certainly those tasks have different requirements from the model capabilities. So the question is not, do I use an agent? Or if I am, which agent should I use? Which model should I use? The question is, how am I going to know? How am I going to know that this part of the task needs 4.6 and this part of the task can work off 4.0 mini? You need some way to evaluate that. And these companies are not going to give it to you because it goes against everything that they're trying to do right now is give you visibility into that sort of granularity, but you got to look for it or you will just keep spending more money.
That's a business in itself, or a consultancy. Like, know how much you're spending, right? You could even like have an MCP server hook in and sort of like say, when you're making commands, you're like, hold on, you can make it cheaper if you use this model. What would it cut? Can I use auto mode for this bug request, this bug fix, or this UI dashboard? And it'd be like, hell no, don't use GPT Mini to build that dashboard. It's gonna look terrible.
I mean, you can probably think if you just sat down and thought about how you do that, right? Like, what would you do? Well, you instead of having an agent do it beginning to end, you'd make a list of the tasks, and then you'd probably put them in like a state machine so you can move between them, right? And then for each one of those tasks, it's a prompt, just one prompt, and so you'd have a collection of models answer it, and then you look across them, and you'd say, well, look for this particular task, Oro many was fine,
And that's what Auto's
so that's what
supposed
I'm
to
going
do.
to do.
Auto is supposed to do that in Cursor, but we have to trust that Cursor are going to give us the best model. And they're probably not going to do that.
I mean, anytime you obscure what's actually happening, right? There's almost certainly a reason that you're doing that. And auto, I think, is a good example because it's basically saying, let them decide. But you don't actually know at any given point in time which one they decide to use, nor do you know how they decided what to use. So you're locked in this mode of like, do I just trust it? And yes, it's faster to do that because you're not having to put a lot of thought into it, but it is the most expensive way to do it by definition, right? Allowing the company whose incentives are to get me to spend more money to decide how I experience their product will result in me spending more money by definition. So you have to be the one to step back and say, no, I'm not going to do it the way they want me to do it. I'm going to think about the best way to approach this. And then I'm going to look at what OpenAI is doing and what Gemini is doing and what Grok is doing and evaluate all of them together, task by task, and then put together the combination of all of those things that lowers your overall costs. And if Opus 4.6 comes along one day and then they run out of investor money and all of a sudden the costs double, you need to know what to switch to, but you need to know right then, right, what it is. So you need to have sort of assessed it and said, yeah, look, these two models are fine, but I'm going to pick this one for now. But if your whole implementation process hasn't been organized that way, you're like starting over every time the models change like that. And that's going to waste a huge amount of time. And it's going to cause you to just go with what they want. It's like we said, it's the most expensive way.
So in summary, I think it's a bit like what we ended on the last podcast. Just be aware. Be aware of what you're doing. Have full awareness, and don't just pull the slot machine.
Don't just pull the slot
Don't pull
machine.
the lever on the
There's
slot.
probably a term, something like media literacy, where they talk about, don't just consume media, like understand how it's being produced, why it's being produced, who's producing it, who's paying for it. There's an AI literacy here where you have to understand where this money's coming from, what they're trying to get you to do. It doesn't mean you can't go along with it. It doesn't mean you can't use it. It allows you to be a lot smarter about how you're going about it.
Yeah. All right. We're coming up to 50 minutes. I probably need to wrap it up because I don't want to spend 2 hours, 3 hours editing this afterwards. Which no, that was a great topic. I thought that was really cool. I know a lot of people will be able to relate to that one too. So yeah, that was great. And by the way, I don't know if anyone's noticed, but obviously as we know, Philip is very smart. But he's extra smart today because he's got his Superman costume on, otherwise known as Dr. Data.
Well, we got to up our game if we're going to be making content, right? And stay tuned if you're thinking as much about costs and tasks and frameworks as I do, because I think there's definitely a lot of opportunity here that I'm going to be talking a lot more about soon, and I don't think we can wait for the Googles and the Geminis to do it for us. So it's going to be a good time.
Where's your pipe?
It's right here.
He's got a pipe because he's Dr. Data. And he's going to wear
Yeah,
this.
this season.
He's going to wear this every show now, right?
Yes, probably not this jacket. See you, folks.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Have a good one.